Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another session of anatomy with me. And today we are going to study the eyelids and the lacrimal apparatus. And here, in a picture of the eyes, there is the picture of the right eye. You can see the eyelids, and you can see the exposed part of the eyeball between the eyelids. And the gap between the eyelids is called the palpebral aperture or the palpebral fissure. And through the palpebral fissure, you can see a part of the sclera covered by the bulbar conjunctiva. You can see the iris, and you can see the cornea, and you can see the pupil, the central aperture of the iris. And in the eyelids you can make out that these are specialized folds of skin which are covering the eyeball anteriorly, and the purpose of the eyelids is first of all protection of the eyeball, and by their movement they can restrict the amount of light entering the eyes, and by the blinking mechanism they will help to distribute the tear film evenly over the ocular surface. And by distributing this tear film evenly, they are creating an even refracting surface, light between the atmosphere, which is the first refracting surface of the eyeball. And the eyelids meet medially at an angle which is called the medial canthus or inner canthus. They meet laterally at an angle which is called the outer canthus or the lateral canthus. And you can make out that the margins of the eyelids have got the eyelashes in 2 or 3 layers, but you can make out the medial 1/6 of the eyelids are devoid of eyelashes, and somewhere here in the medial 1/6 you have got the punctum as part of the lacrimal apparatus, an inferior punctum, lower punctum here, and an upper punctum somewhere here. So the medial 1/6 is sort of blunt and not a sharp margin, and is devoid of eyelashes. The lateral margin, lateral 5/6, has got a sharp margin containing the eyelashes. Again, interior to medial canthus, you have this fleshy triangular substance which is the lacrimal caruncle, and there is a depression over here which causes pooling of tears, which is also called the lacrimal lake or lacus lacrimalis. And over here you have got a triangular fold of conjunctiva which is evaluating membrane of some animals. So this is all that you can see, and you can see that there is a skin fold or a furrow between the upper eyelid and the rest of the skin, and there is a much more shallower furrow between the lower eyelid and the rest of the facial skin. So this is as much as you can see in this diagram. Let us see what comes next. Here you have a cross section of the eyelids, and in a cross section of the upper eyelid, now the cross section of the lower eyelid would be touching the palpebral aperture. The movement of the upper eyelid is more than the movement of the lower eyelid. So another thing which we could have stressed in this picture is that the upper eyelids are more mobile. So in closing the palpebral apertures and narrowing the palpebral fissure, the upper eyelid has a greater role to play. The lower eyelid moves up for a shorter distance. And in the resting position you can also make out that the upper eyelid actually covers the upper part of the cornea, falling just short of the pupillary margin. But the lower eyelid is at the level of the sclerocorneal junction, that is the level of the limbus. Again, let us go back to the next diagram, the cross section of the upper eyelid over here. And from outside inwards, first layer is the skin over here, and when you come down the margin, from the skin you can see the attachment of the eyelashes, the hair follicles of the eyelashes, and along with the hair follicles of the eyelashes you have sweat glands and sebaceous glands. The sebaceous glands, the ends of the eyelashes, they are called the gland of Zeiss, and the sweat glands outside them are the sweat glands of mole. So glands of mole and Zeiss, they are the ciliary sweat gland and the ciliary sebaceous gland. Now these hair or these eyelashes are inward ciliars. So what happens is, if there is inward rolling of the eyelids which is called entropion, then these eyelashes will be irritating the cornea. And if there is outward filling or laxity of the eyelids, as occurs in old age due to loss of muscle tone and skin laxity, then there will be overflow of tears. So again, in this previous diagram, the eyelids is called entropion, irritating the cornea, and the outward rolling of the eyelids is called ectropion, which results in, at the meniscal margin over here, an overflow of tears which is called epiphora. Now inward rolling of the ectropion is usually due to scar tissue on the inner side of the eyelids, and outward rolling of the eyelids is usually due to laxity of the skin, subcutaneous tissue and muscles in old age. Again, these eyelashes and their hair follicles are subject to the problems of hair on the scalp also. they are liable to fungal infection and dandruff like the rest of the scalp hair. Let's again go back to the section of the eyelid. Now beyond the skin you have a layer of subcutaneous loose areolar tissue which does not contain much of fat. It is almost tissue, so there is subcutaneous fat is absent in the eyelids, and deep to that you can see these muscles. These muscles are part of the orbicularis oculi. So orbicularis oculi, you know from the studies of the face that they encircle the bony orbit and they rise up into the forehead. So this is the orbital part of the orbicularis oculi. Then over here you have the pre-tarsal part of the orbicularis oculi, and coming down you have the ciliary part of the collagen. Orbicularis oculi has started up from high up in the orbital heights. So this entire layer is the orbicularis oculi, and below the orbicularis oculi you have a thin layer of submuscular connective thin layer, and then you have the of the levator palpebris superioris aponeurosis, or the fibrous extension of the levator palpebris superioris. Behind that you have this stiff tarsal plate, the stiff fibrous plate that you know is present both in the upper eyelid and in the lower eyelid. In the upper eyelid it's just larger, in the lower eyelid is smaller. So this is the tarsal plate that you have, and you can make out that some fibers from the aponeurosis of the levator palpebris superioris, they are also attached to this margin of the superior tarsus. So this levator palpebris superioris aponeurosis, part of it goes through the orbicularis oculi into the subcutaneous tissue over here, part of it blends with the orbicularis oculi, part of it is attached to the tarsal plate over here, and part of it is also attached to the conjunctival fornix over here. So there are many extensions of this levator palpebris superioris aponeurosis. Now the part of the levator palpebris superioris that is attached to the tarsus is a thin sheet of muscle tissue which is called the Mueller's muscle, and it is involuntary muscle. It has got a sympathetic innervation, unlike the levator palpebris superioris which is innervated by the oculomotor nerve. So a thin delaminated part of the levator palpebris superioris is the superior tarsal muscle or Mueller's muscle, which can now supply involuntary nature, and it is attached to the superior tarsus over here. And you can make out that within the tarsus there is this very long tarsal gland. So you have this very long tarsal gland or meibomian gland, and this tarsal gland gives rise to an oily secretion which is expressed through the duct over here and through the orifices. So you can see the orifices of the tarsal glands in a line just behind the ciliary margin of the eyelid. So these are orifices of the tarsal glands. So you have glands of Mollens eyes, the hair follicles of the eyelashes, the tarsal plate and the tarsal gland, and then you have the palpebral conjunctival lining, which is the innermost layer of the eyelid. So this conjunctival lining has lymphoid in the subconjunctival layer. You have the accessory lacrimal glands of Krauss, accessory lacrimal glands to supply the blood vessels. So again, if you come to this surface of the eyelid, anteriorly you can make out the skin, and posteriorly you make out the conjunctiva. So between them somewhere there has to be a mucocutaneous junction. So the mucocutaneous junction is actually at the level of the tarsal glands. Just behind the tarsal glands you have the mucocutaneous junction of the eyelid, and the lower margin of the tarsal plate gives rise to a small groove over here. You have a small groove here on the just behind the ciliary margin where the tarsal plate ends, and just behind the gland over here you have the mucocutaneous junction, and just in front of the mucocutaneous junction there is what we call a gray line, and this gray line is a plane of cleavage where you can pass your knife into the eyelid between the orbicularis oculi and the tarsal plate. It creates a plane of cleavage, this gray line. So all these things we will be seeing in a better diagram. This is actually too close for comfort, and again because this is the orbital margin, here you have the orbital rat, and because this is the orbital margin, descending from the orbital margin is the septum. So you can see orbital septum, which is an extension of the orbital periosteum attached to tarsal. So a large number of structures, tarsal plate, orbital septum attached to the tarsal, some fibers of the levator palpebris of the levator palpebris superioris also attached to the tarsal plate, glands within the tarsal plate, opening of the glands through minute orifices at ciliary margins beyond the tarsal plate. And in this diagram now, this is a clearer schematic. It is in many respects better than the previous one. So again, in this schematic, you can make out from anterior to posterior the different layers of the eyelids. You can make out the skin, you can make out the fibers of the orbicularis oculi, you can make out the eyelashes and the hair follicles, and you can make out the sweat glands and the sebaceous glands, the glands of mole and zeiss. You can sebaceous here and the ciliary attachment. The glands of this is actually the level of the mucocutaneous junction, and behind it you have the conjunctiva, in front you have the skin. You can make out this small subtarsal sulcus over here. At the lower level of the tarsal plate, you have a small groove. Some foreign bodies, when they are trapped within the conjunctival sac behind the eyelid, they could be trapped here, or they could go up and be trapped over here within the conjunctival. The palpebrae superioris applies to the tarsal plate. Not only that, you have glands of Krauss and Wolff to be referred these clear as the bulbar conjunctiva. So this diagram, this cross-sectional diagram of the eyelid is very important. So the skin is lined by the stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, and this is the conjunctiva, initially lined by stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, gradually extending to form a columnar epithelium, multi-layered. Initially two layered, the basal layers will be more or less cubical, and they are expanding into multi-layered columnar epithelium, layered columnar epithelium. That is why on an average conjunctiva is supposed to have a stratified columnar epithelium. So these are the things, lots of things that you can make out in this diagram, but you have to keep in mind the main things, that is the eyelashes, glands of mole and zeiss, the tarsal plate and the meibomian glands, the orbicularis oculi muscle, orbital septum, aponeurosis of the levator palpebrae superioris and its distribution, a part of the levator palpebrae superioris which is the involuntary molars muscle also coming and getting attached to the tarsal plate, and the conjunctiva, the mucocutaneous junction, the gray line, the accessory lacrimal glands of Krauss and Wolfring. All of these you have to keep in mind. So now let us look at the next diagram. Now in this diagram, what you can make out is that the tarsal plate of the upper eyelid we were looking at. Now there is a tarsal plate of the lower eyelid also, and you can make out the lower eyelid tarsal plate is much smaller than that of the upper eyelid, and because the glands extend throughout the width of the tarsal plate, so there are meibomian glands inside here, there are meibomian glands inside here. The height of the glands will be more here, the height of the glands will be less here, and you can make out these tarsal plates are anchored at the medial palpebral ligament, at the lateral palpebral ligament by fibrous tissue. So although these tarsal plates are within the eyelid, they are anchored to the inner canthus, they are anchored at the outer canthus. At the inner canthus, they are anchored to the anterior crest. Anterior lacrimal crest is part of the frontal process of the maxilla. Posterior lacrimal crest is part of the lacrimal bone itself. So this medial palpebral ligament is attached to the anterior lacrimal crest and to the frontal process of the maxilla, and the lateral palpebral ligament is attached to the Wittnau's tubercle and slightly behind the lateral raphe of the orbicularis oculi. And so these two tarsal plates are anchored to the medial and lateral canthal ligaments, the medial and lateral palpebral ligaments. Not only that, they are anchored to an entire fibrous network which is part of the condensation of the orbital fascia. So you can see there is a transverse ligament over here which is also connected to the tarsal plates through the medial and lateral anchor points, and you can make out that this inferior tarsus has got a fibrous extension to this hammock which suspends the eyeball, which is called the suspensory ligament of Lockwood. And you already know that this suspensory ligament of Lockwood, it is anchored to the it is attached to the fibrous sheath of the inferior rectus and the inferior oblique muscle, and it blends with the medial and lateral palpebral ligaments also. So this suspensory hammock of the eyeball, which is a thickening of the fascia bulbi, this actually hammock is connected to the inferior tarsus. So what happens is, when the inferior rectus and inferior oblique contract, they are going to drag the tarsus down as well, because although you have a levator palpebrae superioris, you don't have a depressor palpebrae inferioris. So the lower lid does not have a particular muscle for depressing it, but because of the connection of the tarsal plate to the suspensory ligament of Lockwood and the sheath of the inferior rectus, action of the inferior rectus will drag down the tarsal plate here and the lower eyelid to some extent, plus it will be aided by gravity. Now let us take a look at the next picture. Here you can see that just as the inferior lower tarsal plate is connected to the ligament of Lockwood and the common sheath of the inferior rectus and the inferior oblique. The superior tarsal plate here is connected to the aponeurosis of the external oblique, which you have already seen. You have seen that the aponeurosis of the external oblique is partly connected to the tarsal plate, and some fibers of it pass anteriorly in front of the tarsal plate to be attached to the orbicularis oculi and go beyond the orbicularis oculi into the skin of the eyelids. So that is what we are trying to demonstrate here. The levator palpebrae superioris, which will mobilize the upper tarsal plate and the eyelid, and this connecting fascia between the lower tarsus and the suspensory ligament of Lockwood, which might help to some extent in mobilizing the lower lid. Let us go to the next picture. In this picture you can see actually the parts of the conjunctiva. You have the palpebral conjunctiva behind the eyelid, and you have the bulbar conjunctiva over the exposed part of the eyeball. Now of the palpebral conjunctiva you have a marginal part, you have a tarsal part, you have an orbital part up to the fornix. The fornix is the pocket. You have a superior and inferior fornix of the conjunctival sac, and so the marginal part, tarsal part and orbital part together form the palpebral conjunctiva, and beyond the fornix the bulbar part is part of the bulbar conjunctiva, and you have a limbal part of the conjunctiva. This is where the conjunctiva blends with the cornea, that is the sclerocorneal junction is the limbus, and that is the conjunctival junction as well. And we know that this limbus of the conjunctiva is the seat of all the stem cells, which will actually go and replace the corneal epithelium here. So this limbal part of the conjunctiva is very important. It contains the stem cells. Now the blood supply, nerve supply and everything of the conjunctiva is almost the same of the eyelids. It is just that the bulbar conjunctiva derives some added blood supply from the episcleral blood vessels. We'll come to that later. Let's see what's next. So here we have an arterial supply of the upper and lower eyelids, and you can make out that on the medial side you have, on the upper eyelid mostly you have the branches of the ophthalmic artery, that is you have supraorbital and supratrochlear arteries, you have a lacrimal artery over here, you have the dorsal nasal artery over here. These are all branches of the ophthalmic artery, and you can see that the dorsal nasal branch of the ophthalmic artery has joined the angular artery, which is part of the facial artery. So mostly you have the terminal branches of the ophthalmic artery in the upper eyelid. You have the supraorbital, supratrochlear, you have the infratrochlear also, a small infratrochlear artery is there. So you have a supratrochlear artery, you have a small infratrochlear artery, and you have the dorsal nasal artery and the lacrimal artery. These are all branches of the ophthalmic artery. Now this is supplemented by branches from the superficial temporal artery from the side, transverse facial artery from the side, and the facial artery coming up medially between the nose and the eyes. So between the nose and the orbit you have the ascending facial artery. This will also contribute to a supply of the eyelids, and from below the major supply to the lower lid is from the infraorbital artery. The infraorbital artery, as you know, is part of the maxillary artery. So this is the branch of the maxillary artery, the infraorbital artery. So the main supply for the upper eyelid from the ophthalmic artery branches, main supply for the lower eyelid is from the maxillary artery through the infraorbital artery, and they are supplemented by the facial artery curling up from over here, branch of the superficial temporal artery on this side, and the transverse facial artery from this side. So all of these are supplying the two eyelids, and these arterial arcades in the eyelids, there is a marginal arcade and there is a peripheral arcade. So here you have a peripheral arcade, here you have a marginal arcade connecting the medial palpebral branches and the lateral palpebral branches. For the lower lid, in most cases you have only one arcade, not two. So all of these major arteries that are here, they give palpebral branches which are supplying the lids, and these palpebral branches form marginal arcades and peripheral arc, and they supply the eyelids. Not only they supply the eyelids, they also supply the adjacent palpebral conjunctiva, and the bulbar conjunctiva on the side of the eyeball is also supplied by branches from the palpebral arteries curling over the conjunctival fornix, and partly the bulbar conjunctiva is also supplied by the episcleral vessels which are crawling over the surface of the sclera. So much for the arteries. The veins mainly follow the arteries, and they drain externally either into the facial veins or the superficial temporal or transverse facial veins, and some drain internally into the superior and inferior ophthalmic veins. So venous drainage is partly within the orbit into the superior and inferior ophthalmic veins, and partly outside the orbit to the facial veins and the superficial temporal veins and the transverse facial veins and the infraorbital. Now this diagram is somewhat more colorful, but essentially the same. You have the nasal aperture over here. So this is the left eye, and medially again you can make out the supraorbital and supratrochlear arteries, and you can make out the palpebral branches arising medially from the supraorbital and supratrochlear arteries. You can make out the angular artery, which is the termination of the facial artery, and the dorsal nasal artery, which is again one of the branches of the ophthalmic artery. And you can see these palpebral branches, the palpebral arcades, the peripheral arcade and the marginal arcade that is going to supply the upper lid. And in the lower lid also you have branches from the medial and lateral palpebral branches. On the lateral side you have the lacrimal artery, some branches from the lacrimal artery, and from the superficial temporal artery some branches coming and joining the palpebral branches over here from the lateral side. And again you have through these openings the zygomaticofacial arteries coming up, and in the lower eyelid you can see the infraorbital artery. So for the lower eyelid the main artery is the infraorbital, supplemented by the superficial temporal from here and the transverse facial from here. For the upper eyelid the main supply is through the terminal branches of the ophthalmic artery, supplemented by the facial artery between the eyes and the nose coming up in this direction. So let us look at the next picture. Here again you can see the arteries supplying medial side, the medial set of palpebral arteries you can see very well in this picture. You can see the supraorbital artery, you can see the supratrochlear artery, you can see the termination of the ophthalmic artery as the dorsal nasal artery, you can see the rise of the facial artery as the angular artery, you can see the connection between the dorsal nasal and the angular artery, and you can make out the infraorbital artery from below. So all these infraorbital arteries contributing to both the lateral and medial palpebral branches, but most of these others are all contributing to the medial palpebral arteries. On the lateral side you have the lacrimal artery. This lacrimal artery is coming to the lateral palpebral contribution, and on the lateral side, because it is cut off, you cannot see the contribution of the branch of the superficial temporal artery and the transverse facial artery, but the medial set of palpebral arteries you can see very well in this diagram. Let's see what's next. Now here in the upper eyelid you can make out the position of the lacrimal gland. So in the upper outer corner of the orbit you have the lacrimal fossa, and this lacrimal fossa is in a depression underneath the orbital plate of the frontal bone and just inside the zygomatic process of the frontal bone. There deep within the frontal bone you have the lacrimal fossa, and there you have the lacrimal gland. Now what you can make out, you can see the extent of the levator palpebrae superioris, the muscular part and the fibrous aponeurotic part, and you can see the levator palpebrae superioris going into the upper eyelid, and you can make out that this lacrimal gland is indented by the lateral sharp margin of the levator palpebrae superioris, so that a larger part of the lacrimal gland is stuck to the undersurface of the roof of the orbit, and a smaller part of the lacrimal gland is protruding into the soft tissue of the upper eyelid. So the lacrimal gland has got an orbital lobe and a palpebral lobe. The orbital lobe is stuck into the roof of the orbit. Above it is fixed to the orbital wall. In front it extends up to the orbital septum and orbital fat. So then it is merging with the orbital septum and the orbital fat, above with the roof of the orbit and below with the aponeurosis of the levator palpebrae superioris. So this is the position of the orbital lobe of the lacrimal gland, and you have a palpebral lobe which is actually protruding for a short distance below the aponeurosis of the levator palpebrae superioris. The problem is that the multiple ducts, about 12 or 15 of the lacrimal gland, they are going from the deeper orbital lobe to the superficial palpebral lobe, and then they are opening into the conjunctival fornix, upper conjunctival fornix on the lateral side. So because all of these ducts are passing actually through the palpebral lobe, if you remove the superficial part of the lacrimal gland, you will be disturbing the whole gland, because you will be cutting through the duct system. So you have to keep in mind, although the orbital lobe of the lacrimal gland is much larger and the palpebral lobe of the lacrimal gland superficial to the levator palpebrae superioris is a smaller one, all the ducts are actually passing through the palpebral lobe before opening up into the upper conjunctival fornix. That is something that you need to keep in mind. Now if you look at the whole extent over here, you can see the orbital part of the lacrimal gland, the smaller palpebral part of the lacrimal gland, and the ducts opening into upper conjunctival fornix. So the secretions of the lacrimal gland, actually they are watery secretions, and they contribute to the tear film. So the tear film actually has secretions from multiple sources. Number one, it has the secretion of the tarsal glands or the meibomian glands, which is an oil secretion. So front you have an oil film, and then you have the watery secretions of the lacrimal glands, and deep inside you have the secretions from the goblet cells, that the mucus secretions from the conjunctiva. You know, the conjunctival epithelium has got a lot of goblet cells. They are secreting the mucus. So you have an oily layer, you have a watery layer, and you have a mucus layer. So the tear film actually has three layers. And because the outermost and most superficial layer is the oily layer from the tarsal glands, it will help to contain the evaporation of the tears and steady the tear film. Anyway, let's go back to the lacrimal gland. So the secretions of the lacrimal gland, they are being discharged into the upper conjunctival fornix somewhere here, and along the upper and lower lid margins, they will flow along the fornices and the lid margin menisci. These are called the fluid meniscus, and they are going to reach the lacrimal lake over here. And in the lacrimal lake you have the upper punctum and the lower punctum, and from the punctum you have the upper lacrimal canaliculus and the lower lacrimal canaliculus. So both the upper and the lower lacrimal canaliculi, they have a vertical part and they have a horizontal part. The total is about 10 millimeter vertical part and an 8 millimeter part, of which although both are 10 millimeter, the lower one is slightly larger. The lower lacrimal canaliculi are slightly larger, and between the vertical part and the horizontal part, somewhere here you have a small dilatation that is called the ampulla. So from the punctum you have the lacrimal canaliculi, vertical part, ampulla, horizontal part, then a common canaliculus, and from the common canaliculus it is entering into the lacrimal sac. So this lacrimal sac is into the lacrimal fossa, and this lacrimal fossa is in the medial wall of the orbit, as you know, between the anterior and posterior lacrimal crests. And the anterior lacrimal crest is on the frontal process maxilla, the posterior lacrimal crest is on the crest of the lacrimal bone, and this is the medial palpebral ligament that you have here, and it is bridging over the lacrimal fascia. And you know that the orbicularis oculi muscle that you have here, it has an orbital part outside, it has a palpebral part within the lids, and it has a lacrimal part as well. So the lacrimal part of the orbicularis oculi is attached to the lacrimal fascia over the lacrimal sac, and it creates something of a negative suction. And between the fascia and the lacrimal sac itself, you have a small plexus of veins. And this lacrimal sac is something about 12 millimeters long, and it is flattened from side to side, and it leads into the nasolacrimal duct, and this lacrimal duct is about 80 millimeters long. And what happens is, in this common canaliculi, where these two upper and lower lacrimal canaliculi meet to form a common channel here, the fibers of the orbicularis oculi are crisscrossing over these canaliculi, and they create a sort of a pseudo sphincter or a valve like act. The people are not very much having a consensus regarding this valve of Rosenmuller, but there is some sort of a sphincteric action by the interlacing of the fibers of the auricularis oculi. But when the tears are finally collected by the lacrimal sac, and they are drained down into the lacrimal duct and open into the lacrimal duct, and this nasolacrimal duct opens into the inferior meatus of the nose. Within this nasolacrimal duct there are several mucous folds, and one of these mucous folds is large enough to maybe act as a valve, and this large mucous fold which acts as a valve is called the valve of Hassner. So this is the entire pathway of the lacrimal drainage. The secretion from the lacrimal gland into the upper conjunctival fornix, overflow into both the upper and lower conjunctival fornix, follow the lid margin meniscus into the lacrimal lake, from the lacrimal lake picked up by the upper and lower puncta, then into the lacrimal canaliculus, the vertical part of the canaliculus, ampulla, horizontal part of the canaliculus, the common channel of the lacrimal canaliculus, entry into the lacrimal sac, beyond the lacrimal sac coming down the gravilacrimal duct, beyond the valve of Hassner, opening into the inferior meatus of the nose. This is the pathway of circulation of the lacrimal fluid. And again we remind you that the tear fluid has got three layers. One oily layer contributed to by the tarsal glands, one aqueous layer contributed to by the lacrimal glands. Apart from this, you have the minor lacrimal glands within the conjunctiva sac, and then you have the mucous layer contributed by the goblet cells of the conjunctiva itself. So you have already studied a lot about these lacrimal Going back to the eyelids for a short time, we have studied the arteries and the veins, but we have not studied the lymphatics and the nerves. Now, lymphatics are very easy. For medial part of the eyelids, or the medial half of the eyelids, the lymphatics go into the submandibular lymph nodes following the facial vein. So you have the facial artery here, you have the facial vein here. Follow the direction of the facial vein. The medial half of the eyelids, they go into the submandibular lymph nodes in the digastric triangle, and the lateral half of the eyelids, they go into the preauricular parotid group of lymph nodes. So medial part of the eyelids going into the submandibular lymph node, lateral part of the eyelids going into the preauricular parotid group of lymph nodes. Now nerve supply of the eyelids is the same as the nerve supply of the face in this region. That is, you have the supratrochlear, supraorbital nerve, you have the lacrimal nerve, you have the infratrochlear nerve, and the external nasal nerve. So supratrochlear, supraorbital, and lacrimal, they will be supplying the upper eyelid, and the infratrochlear and the external nasal over here, they will be supplying the region on the boundary of the lower eyelid, and the infraorbital nerve, very large over here, they will be supplying the major part of the lower eyelid. On this side you have the zygomaticofacial and the zygomaticotemporal. So the zygomaticofacial will also contribute to the lower eyelid. So the nerve supply of the face is the same as the nerve supply of the eyelids. The nerve which are close to the eyelids, both the upper eyelid and the lower eyelid, will supply the eyelids, and also they will supply the palpebral conjunctiva, and curling around the conjunctival fornix, they will supply also the large part of the bulbar conjunctiva. So this is more or less the supply. Now let's go back to where we were. We were somewhere here. Now after studying the gross properties of the lacrimal drainage system or the lacrimal system, we are going to this diagram, and in this diagram you can make out the main lacrimal gland and the accessory lacrimal glands over here. So the accessory lacrimal glands that we were talking about, so you have secretions from the tarsal glands, you have secretions from the lacrimal glands, and you have secretions from the goblet cells of the conjunctiva. So the tarsal glands secreting an oily lipid, and the lacrimal glands secreting a watery secretion, and the conjunctival goblet cells secreting the mucus. So oil, water, and mucus, the three layers of the lacrimal secretion. What else remains? Now this is a detailing of the lacrimal gland. It's a tubular acinar system, and you can see the tubule and the acini. So these are the acini, and the acini open into a short intercalated duct and into the main excretory ducts. Terminal small lobules are there coming out from the main excretory ducts. So you have multiple excretory ducts, 12 to 15. They are all going into lobules of the lacrimal gland, and each of these open up into the striated ducts and then into the individual acini. And here is the secretory cell of the acinus with the secretory granules towards the lumen, and the nucleus and the endoplasmic reticulum towards the base. And the important thing to remember is that scattered over these acini, these terminal acini, are the myoepithelial cells, and over the intercalated or initial duct systems also you have the myoepithelial cells, and these myoepithelial cells, by contraction, they help in expulsion of the contents or secretions of these glands. Now here you have a detail, a histological detail of the lacrimal gland, the tubuloacinar system. You can see the sections of the acini over here, and the sections of the duct here, and the blood vessels over here. Now here you can make out the supply to the lacrimal gland through the lacrimal artery, which is a branch of the ophthalmic artery. And beyond that, last but not the least, the nerve supply of the lacrimal gland. You know that the lacrimal gland is supplied by the facial nerve, by parasympathetic secretomotor fibers, and these branches from the facial nerve, they arise from the facial nerve within the temporal bone at the level of the geniculate ganglion, and it's called the greater superficial petrosal nerve. So over here you have the greater superficial petrosal nerve, and this is the deep petrosal nerve carrying sympathetic fibers, and the greater superficial petrosal nerve and the deep petrosal nerve join to form the pterygoid canal, and the nerve of the pterygoid canal, it goes into the pterygopalatine ganglion where the parasympathetic fibers relay, the sympathetics don't, and beyond the pterygopalatine ganglion they go back into the maxillary nerve, because the maxillary nerve itself gives support to the pterygopalatine ganglion. From the maxillary nerve they go into the zygomatic branch of the maxillary nerve, and you have the communicating branch from the zygomaticotemporal nerve. You know the zygomatic nerve gives the zygomaticofacial and zygomaticotemporal. and from the zygomaticotemporal nerve you have the communicating branch, this communicating branch to the lacrimal nerve. So lacrimal nerve is part of the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, and zygomatic nerve is part of the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve, and facial nerve is another cranial nerve altogether. So starting from the fascia, the fibers are starting from the facial nerve, getting transferred first to the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve, then to the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, and through the gland they are ultimately going into the lacrimal gland and supplying secretomotor fibers, and the sympathetic supplying fibers to the blood vessels. So in a nutshell, we have more or less covered the eyelid and the lacrimal apparatus. There are a lot of applied anatomy aspects to this. Different problems of the eyelids and the lacrimal apparatus, the problems of dry eyes, the problems of infections of the lacrimal apparatus. If you go back, that is inflammation of the lacrimal gland itself, and dacryocystitis, that is infection of the lacrimal sac. Inflammation of the lacrimal sac itself is more common due to ascending infections from the nose and occasional infections from the eyes. You can have infection of the lacrimal sac where it is covered into a bag of pus. In such cases, apart from antibiotics, you have to manually express the secretions of the lacrimal sacs by massaging this region so that some of this purulent secretion is expelled here through the conjunctival fornix, and some of it is expelled down into the nose along with a stiff dose of antibiotics, of course. So dacryocystitis, dacryoadenitis is very important. So this drainage of the lacrimal sac sometimes may be hampered, and in that case you have an operation which is called dacryocystorhinostomy. That is increasing the area of opening of the nasolacrimal duct. We won't go into that anyway. Let's see what else we can discuss about applied anatomy. About applied anatomy, suppose we come to this picture. In this picture you see you have one gland here which can be infected, that is the tarsal glands or the meibomian gland. If the gland is it gives rise to a semi-solid cheese material which bulges, which causes a gradual, a very low curved bulge over here on the eyelid and smaller bulge on the inner side of the eyelid, and this is more or less firm. It does not appear to be very painful or purulent, but the accumulation of this fatty secretion causes quite a lot of discomfort, and this accumulation of secretions of the tarsal glands due to obstruction to the duct is called the chalazion, and this frequently has to be scooped out from the inner side of the eyelid. You have to invert the eyelid, and from this side you have to scoop out the material inside and give relief. And now these glands of Moll and Zeiss, the sweat glands and sebaceous glands around the hair follicles of the eyelashes, they can also be infected, and these are very painful. If these folliculitis occurs in the eyelashes, these are called styes, and these styes are often very painful, purulent pus points along the ciliary margin, and recurrent styes or recurrent purulent abscesses of the hair follicles are very common in diabetic patients. So if you have recurrent folliculitis and recurrent styes, you have to be very careful and you have to see whether the patient is diabetic or not. So like that there are many other aspects, all of which you cannot discuss in an anatomy class. I think